Kill them all. Leave nothing standing. The man who gave the order did not raise his voice when he gave it, and that was the part that would stay with the survivors longer than the dust or the screaming. He said it the way a foreman says a shift is over. He stood at the lip of the wadi with one boot pressed flat against the spine of a wounded American, grinding the soldier's cheek into the gravel, and he lifted 2 fingers toward the ridgeline behind him. 100 rifles came up at once. 26 men of Bravo Company had no cover left, no high ground, and nothing at all between their bodies in the next 4 minutes. Sergeant First Class Tomas Reyer keyed his radio and screamed for a marksman, for a sniper, for anyone with a long gun and a steady hand. The net answered him with static, and then from the back of the broken column behind the medics and the supply detail where no one ever looked, a hard polymer case popped its latches and breathed open. The morning had not warned them. Mornings rarely do. The men who survive long enough to retire will tell you that the worst days arrive disguised as ordinary ones, and the day above combat outpost Verity began as ordinary as bread. The sun came up over the Khorram Pass the color of a struck match, red bleeding into the brown haze that hung over that whole stretch of country, and for about 9 minutes it was almost beautiful. Specialist Mateo Ruiz was heating water for coffee. Corporal Del Hale was arguing, quietly and without heat, about whether a particular ball player belonged in the Hall of Fame. The first mortar round landed at 0617 and ended the argument permanently. It did not so much hit the eastern berm as remove it. One instant there was a sandbag wall and a generator and a man named Pruitt checking the oil. The next there was a crater and a ringing pressure that pushed the air out of everyone's lungs at once, and Pruitt was 12 feet away on his back, alive, deaf, staring at a sky that had personally betrayed him. Reyer was already flat in the dirt before the second round walked in. That was 12 years of soldiering doing what 12 years does. It rewires a man below the level of thought, so the body drops before the mind is finished deciding to be afraid. He didn't choose to hit the deck. He simply arrived there, palms in the grit, the radio shrieking against his hip. Contact east, all stations, get down. His voice came out level, and that levelness was not calm. It was a tool. A platoon will follow a voice that doesn't crack the way iron filings follow a magnet, and Reyer had learned long ago to keep the fear out of his throat even when it was busy filling the rest of him. He low-crawled to the edge of the collapsed berm and looked north, and what he saw rearranged his understanding of the morning. They were coming down the far slope in staggered ranks. Not a mob, not raiders looking for a generator to steal. They moved in bounds, one element down behind cover while another rushed past it, then the inverse, the disciplined leapfrog of soldiers who had been drilled by someone who knew the trade. He counted, and the counting was bad. 3 platoons, maybe more. 90 men where he had 26, and a third of his 26 were already bleeding from the mortars. The arithmetic of it sat in his chest like a swallowed stone. Reyer was not a man who panicked, but he was a man who could read a board, and the board said they were going to die on this hill unless something changed that he could not currently imagine. Verity 6, this is Reyer. He was calling the company commander, Captain Wes Adair, who was somewhere on the west side trying to hold the other approach. I've got 3+ platoons in the open on the north face. They are coming for the gap. I need everything we have on the north wall, and I need it now. On it. Air? Requested. They're saying 40 minutes, sir. The pause on the net was its own kind of answer. 40 minutes against those numbers was a polite way of saying you are on your own. Adair did not say that. He said, hold the gap, Tom, and the use of the first name told Reyer everything the captain wouldn't put on an open channel. What no one on that net knew yet, what almost no one on the entire outpost knew, was that one of the bodies lying flat behind the supply containers was not a clerk. Her name was Iris Whitlock. To the company, she was the survey specialist, the quiet one from battalion, who had shown up 4 months earlier with a battered case and a clipboard and a habit of speaking only when spoken to. She ran the survey and meteorological section, which is to say, she spent her days measuring angles and distances and computing the density of the air, the kind of unglamorous mathematics that other people's weapons depend on without ever thanking. The men were friendly to her in the offhand way soldiers are friendly to support staff. None of them had ever seen her hands when they were busy. None of them knew that before the survey section, before battalion, before the careful invisibility she had built around herself like a second uniform, Whitlock had been one of the best long-range shooters the school at Fort Benning had graduated in a decade. There is a particular gift that shows up rarely, and it is not steadiness of hand, though that helps, and it is not eyesight, though that helps too. It is a fluency with the invisible. A round fired at a man 600 meters away does not travel in a straight line. It falls the entire way, pulled down by a planet that does not care about the war. It drifts sideways because the air is moving, and it drifts a second time, subtly, because the bullet is spinning, and a third time, almost imperceptibly, because the Earth itself is rotating beneath the flight. Most shooters learn to compensate for these forces from a chart. A very few feel them, the way a sailor feels weather, the way Whitlock felt them, as a single shape in the mind, a curve she could see before she ever touched the trigger. Her math instructors in another life had said she could do in her head what other people needed a calculator for. The Army had found a more lethal use for the talent, and then, after one terrible morning, had nearly lost it on purpose. She had buried that gift in a survey section by choice. 2 years now. There was a reason, and the reason had a name, and the name was Jonah Vane. But that is a story for later in the morning, when there is time to bleed it. Right now the mortars had stopped, which meant the infantry was about to start, and Whitlock was lying in the dirt, listening to Rayer's voice on the net beg for a sniper that the company did not have on its roster. The school-trained shooters had rotated out a month ago. The man who screamed for a long gun did not know he had 115 meters behind him, lying still, doing the thing she always did first, which was the math. She had already ranged the tower. There was a structure on the southeast corner of the outpost that everyone called the tower out of habit, though it had been a stone water cistern before the war, and an observation post before the last attack, and was now, after the mortars, a partial ruin. 3 of its 4 walls were sound. The eastern wall was simply gone, peeled away, and the missing wall was exactly the problem and exactly the opportunity. Because a missing wall is a window with no glass and no frame, and from the upper platform that window looked out across the entire north face of the Khorram Pass. She had surveyed it her first week. She knew the elevation of the platform to within a foot. She knew the slant range to the base of the far ridge to within 10 meters, because measuring exactly that kind of distance was after all her actual job. She rose. She did not announce it. She crossed to the case behind the supply container, knelt, and opened it, and Specialist Ruiz, lying next to her with his rifle and his terror, watched a clerk lift a Barrett out of a foam cutout like she was lifting a sleeping child, and he said, "Whitlock, what the hell?" And she did not answer him because there was nothing in the questions she needed. It took her 4 seconds to clear the tower stairs in her head. Angles, cover, the dead spaces where she'd be exposed. She went up the inside of the ruin with the long gun across her back, and the stone groaned somewhere under her weight on the 3rd landing, and she filed the sound away as information and kept climbing. On the upper platform, the air was cleaner, the way height always cleans the air, and the whole battlefield lay open in front of the absent eastern wall like a map someone had spread for her benefit. She went prone behind the stub of the southern parapet, set the bipod, and put her eye to the scope, and the world changed character the way it always did. A good optic does not just make things larger, it makes them legible. Distances compress. The dust resolves into individual particles. Men who were anonymous shapes to the naked eye become specific human beings. This one limping, this one young, this one shouting orders with his mouth open in a black O. And that legibility is a weight all its own, because you cannot pretend at that magnification that the targets are not people. Whitlock had stopped pretending years ago. She had simply learned to carry the knowing. The enemy was reforming for the push. She watched them and felt something cold and familiar settle over her. Not the absence of feeling, but its complete management. The stillness that her instructors had never been able to teach, and her replacements had never been able to fake. She keyed the squad net, and the voice that came out of her was not the survey clerk's voice. It was flat and certain, and it stopped Rayer mid-sentence. "Rayer, this is Whitlock. I'm in the tower. I have eyes on the north face and a clear lane. Tell your people to hold their positions and let me work the long shots." A pause on the net, the specific silence of a man recalibrating his entire understanding of who he had under his command. Whitlock? Survey Whitlock? Same one. Hold the gap, Sergeant. I'll thin them out. She did not wait for permission. Permission is for situations with time. The first man she chose was not the closest. The narrator of any honest war story must pause here, because the choice she made in that half second is the whole craft, and it is invisible to everyone who isn't her. The enemy assault did not run on courage. It ran on coordination, on the handful of men who carried the radios and pointed the arms and turned 90 frightened individuals into a single moving instrument. Kill a rifleman and you have killed a rifleman. Kill the man directing the rifleman, and you have for 30 seconds killed the assault. Whitlock found the man with the radio handset pressed to his ear, the one whose gestures the others were watching, and she built the shot. Range, 440. The wind was quartering from the left at perhaps 8, reading off the dust and the lean of the scrub. She held the curve in her mind, the drop, the drift, the small Coriolis bias she didn't bother to name even to herself anymore because it had become reflex. She let her breath out halfway and stopped. The Barrett is not a gentle weapon. It struck her shoulder like a closing door, and through the scope she watched coordination leave the enemy's north, face the way light leaves a room. The assault stuttered. Men who had been moving with purpose suddenly looked to where their purpose had been standing and found a gap. She was already on the next one, the man who stepped up to fill the radio role, because someone always does, and she gave him 3 seconds to reveal himself by acting like a leader, and then she ended that too. The third wave, which had been 40 seconds from overrunning the gap, faltered at 200 meters and went to ground. And the narrator notes, because it matters, that trained infantry does not go to ground because it is losing. It goes to ground because it has lost its nerve, and a force can recover from casualties far faster than it can recover from the discovery that there is a ghost on the high ground who removes a man every time someone tries to lead. Rayer, her voice again even, their command element on the north face is down. They'll try the flanks next. Watch your east. He watched his east. They came at the east. For the next 11 minutes, the battle settled into a shape, and Whitlock became its hinge. She did not fire often. A sniper who fires often is a sniper who is about to be located, and locating her was the only thing the enemy commander on the far ridge could do to win. She fired deliberately, into the joints of every attack, into the men who mattered, and between shots she talked, calm, specific, the voice of someone reading coordinates off a board, and Rayer's defense organized itself around her sight picture like a body around a spine. But she was not alone up there in the way that counts. 640 meters out, on the eastern shoulder of the ridge, there was a man who had been lying perfectly still for a quarter of an hour. She had found him during her first sweep before she ever fired, because the first thing a sniper does in a new position is hunt for the other sniper, and Whitlock's first thought on the platform had not been where are the targets, but where would I be if I were trying to kill the person who set up here. There were 2 candidates on the far ridge. One was a spotter, almost certainly too eager, shifting too often. The other had not moved at all, and the stillness was the tell. He had set up before the third push began. He had anticipated the tower. He had understood, the way she understood, that the broken cistern was the only position worth taking and that sooner or later someone competent would take it. And he had built his whole patient morning around putting a round through that someone's head the moment they revealed themselves. Rayer, she said, I have a counter-sniper, East Ridge, 640. He's good. He's been waiting for me. A pause. He knows you're up there. He knows someone would be. He doesn't know it's me. She let her breathing slow. That's the only advantage I've got. Here the narrator must explain a thing that the men below could not see and would not have believed. A duel between 2 long-range shooters is not a quick draw. It is a problem in patience and geometry, 2 minds each trying to solve the other before being solved. The man at 640 had the better hide. She could see only a smudge of him, a suggestion of a barrel in shadow. He had the steadier position and the longer weight behind him. What he did not have, what he could not have, was the specific thing that lived behind Iris Whitlock's eyes. The ability to compute, in the time it took to exhale, exactly how the wind that lay between them would treat 2 bullets traveling in opposite directions. and to know with a cold mathematical certainty whose round would arrive first and truest. He fired when she shifted to engage a runner on the eastern approach. He had to. It was the moment she'd exposed the most of herself, and he took it. And his round struck the stub of the southern parapet 4 inches from her face and filled the air with stone splinters, and she did not flinch, because flinching was a decision. And she had spent 7 years training the decision out of her body. She did the opposite of flinch. She used the muzzle flash he'd just given her, the single thing his discipline could not hide, to correct the smudge in her scope into a point, and she held the curve, 640 meters of falling and drifting, and the faint sideways pull of the turning earth, and she sent the answer back along the line his own shot had drawn for her. The smudge on the east ridge stopped being a problem. "Counter snipers down," she said, and the relief on the net was a physical thing, a dozen men exhaling at once into their handsets. But the morning was not done, and the worst of it was coming, and it would not be solved with marksmanship. It would be solved, or not, by the kind of decision that has no good answer. The enemy commander on the far ridge, the one whose voice Rayer had heard giving the no survivors order, the cold foreman's voice, was not a fool, and with his northern assault broken and his counter-snipper gone, he changed his shape. He pulled a command vehicle forward, a battered technical with a heavy gun mounted in the bed, and he used it the way you use armor when your infantry has lost its nerve. As a wall to advance behind, as a thing to restore the men's courage by giving them something that bled confidence. It rolled into the eastern approach, and its gun began to chew the outpost's last good machine gun position to splinters, and Rayer's eastern line, which had been holding by its fingernails, began to come apart. "Whitlock, the truck, can you reach the truck?" "Working it." The technical was 580 meters out and moving, and the man who mattered was not the man on the gun, but the man standing in the bed beside it with the radio and the binoculars, the commander himself, exposed now because exposure was how you led from the front and rebuilt a frightened company's spine. A moving target at 580 meters is a problem most shooters will not attempt. Whitlock did not see a moving target. She saw a velocity and a vector and a lead, a problem with a clean solution if she trusted the solution, and the whole question of the next 10 seconds came down to whether she trusted herself the way she had refused to trust herself for 2 years. She built the shot on the man in the bed, led him by the width of the math, breathed out and stopped, and then the eastern machine gun went dry. "Guns out!" Corporal Hale's voice cracked across the net. I need ammo on the east. I'm dry. The narrator must slow down here because everything that matters about Iris Whitlock happens in the next 90 seconds, and most of it happens inside her skull. A machine gun is not one weapon. It is the keystone of a defensive line, and when it falls silent, the men nearest, it feel the silence the way you feel a dropped heartbeat. The enemy felt it too. Trained infantry senses a gun going quiet the way it senses a shift in the wind, and the eastern element surged toward the opening. The ammunition Hale needed was 40 meters behind him at the supply point, and the man closest to it was Ruiz, the kid who had been heating coffee an hour ago, and Ruiz grabbed 2 cans of cow and ran. 40 meters of open ground, the most dangerous errand of the morning. The eastern element saw the cans, understood instantly what the resupply of that gun would mean for them, and put every weapon they had on him. Ruiz went down at the halfway mark. Not hit, dropped, the ammunition skidding 10 meters short of the gun, and then pinned, flat in the dirt with rounds stitching the ground around him, alive only because moving would end him. Whitlock had her scope on the commander in the truck bed. 1 round chambered. The cold, clean shot she had been refusing herself for 2 years sat under her finger, finished perfect. The man who had ordered her platoon's massacre held in the center of her reticle 580 meters away. And 40 meters from her own people, a 20-year-old who made coffee was about to be killed in the dirt. She could not have both. That is the truth the math gave her, and it was a true and ugly truth. If she fired her 1 round into the position suppressing Ruiz, the fire would shift. Not stop, but shift. Just enough for the kid to crawl the last 10 meters to the cans and feed the gun, and she would be empty, with minutes still left on the clock, and a command vehicle still rolling, and the man who started all of it still standing in the bed of his truck, untouched, free to do it all again, on some other ridge, some other morning, to some other 26. Or she could take the commander, end the head of the snake, and let Ruiz die for it. Here is the thing the narrator knows that Whitlock did not let herself dwell on. This was the same shape, exactly the same shape, as the morning 2 years ago that had broken her. Jonah Vane had been 19. A bad fire mission had been cleared up the chain, a grid that should not have been struck, and Whitlock. Sergeant Whitlock then, a shooter and a thinker who saw the geometry of things, had run the math and known that the grid was wrong, and she had filed the report. She had done the formal, correct, by-the-book thing. The report had gone up and been absorbed and produced nothing, and the strike had happened, and Vane had died, and the system that ate her warning never so much as flinched. For 14 months after that, she had not been able to look at a long gun. She had transferred to survey, to the math without the killing, to a life made small enough that no decision she made could ever cost a boy his life again. She had reduced herself to the minimum required to keep breathing, and she had told herself it was peace. It had never been peace. It had been hiding. And the universe, with its terrible economy, had brought her up a broken tower to face the exact decision she had spent 2 years running from. Except this time it was hers alone, with no chain of command to absorb it, no report to file, nothing between her finger and the consequence. She keyed the radio. Her voice did not change. "Rayer, I'm clearing Ruiz. I'll be empty after." "A beat. You're sure? You fire that round on the suppressors. You've got nothing for the truck." "I know what I've got, Sergeant." She moved her reticle off the commander. She moved it off the man who had ordered her people slaughtered, off the clean, perfect vengeance that would have closed the oldest wound she carried, and she put it instead on the dirt 20 meters in front of a frightened 20-year-old, on the men who were trying to kill him. And she chose the boy in front of her over the symbol on the ridge, because Jonah Vane had taught her, too late, at a cost she would never finish paying, that you do not trade the person in front of you for the satisfaction of the larger reckoning. The reckoning can wait. The boy cannot. She fired. The suppressing position came apart, and the eastern fire shifted exactly as the math had promised. A window of 3 seconds, and into that window Ruiz crawled the last 10 meters with the cans, and hail fed the gun, and the eastern machine gun came roaring back to life, and the surge that had been about to take the line broke against it and stalled. Ruiz lived. 20 meters of dirt and a kid who made coffee lived, because a survey clerk gave up her revenge for him and never told a soul that's what it cost. She lay there, empty, no rounds, minutes still on the clock, the command vehicle still rolling, the cold-voiced man in its bed still alive. She had made the right call, and it had taken the only thing she wanted, and the narrator will not pretend those two facts cancel. They simply both were true, sitting in her chest side by side, the way the hardest things always do. The aircraft came at minute 31, 9 minutes early, because a pilot somewhere had heard the traffic on the net and pushed the throttle past what the schedule allowed. The narrator likes to think a man did that. It is the kind of thing men do. 2 A-10s came in low over the Khorram Pass with that particular ugly thunder, and the technical that Whitlock had spared became a smear of black smoke. And the enemy commander, the cold foreman of the morning, broke and ran with what was left of his 90, and Iris Whitlock watched him go through her scope with no round to send after him and let him live a second time. 25 of the 26 walked off combat outpost Verity. The one who didn't was named Pruitt, and he died of the first mortar before Whitlock ever climbed the tower, before any of it. And she carried his name too, later, because that is what people like her do with names. She took a round through the left shoulder in the last 10 minutes, fragments off the parapet that she hadn't even registered taking, and she finished the fight and climbed down the tower under her own power, and only sat when there was no one left who needed her standing. They medivaced her to Landstuhl in Germany, and that is where Rayer found her 4 days later, his arm in a sling of his own, both of them looking out a window at a sky that was running orange toward evening with the total indifference of skies. He stood in the doorway a while before she noticed him, or before she let him see she'd noticed. Soldiers who have been through a thing together share a quiet that doesn't need filling. "They're putting you in for things," he said finally, "things with ribbons. They can keep them." He came in and sat, careful with the slings. "Survey," he said, and there was no mockery in it, only a kind of astonished respect. You were Survey. I was a lot of things. She watched the sky. Survey was the one that let me sleep. He didn't ask why she'd stopped being the other thing. He'd been a soldier long enough to know that everybody up that tower had a Jonah vein in their past, some name that explained why they'd made themselves smaller than their gifts, and that you did not go reaching into another man's reasons uninvited. Instead, he asked the only thing that was his to ask. What are you going to do now? She was quiet for a moment. The right hand was steady on the blanket. The left was wrapped and beginning the slow argument with healing that a shoulder makes. Physical therapy, she said. 6 weeks, and then I'm going to make a decision I can live with. A breath. Not just survive with, live with. That's a different thing, he said. Yeah, she said, and something that had been clenched in her for 2 years let go by a single degree. It is. He stood. He put out his hand, and it was not a formality. It was the deliberate thing soldiers offer each other across the gap of having survived something together, and she took it with her good hand, firm. It was an honor, Specialist Whitlock, he said. She held the grip a second longer than the gesture required. Iris, she said. He nodded once, slow. Iris. The narrator could end the morning there, and it would be a clean ending, and clean endings are a kind of lie that war does not get to tell. So it goes a little further, the way the truth does. 6 months later, Iris Whitlock was teaching. The Army, having very nearly thrown away the most fluent long-range mind it had produced in a decade, had finally found the sense to put her in front of the next generation of shooters, and she stood at a chalkboard in a low building at Fort Harrison and taught young soldiers the geometry of the invisible. The fall, the drift, the turning earth, and she watched them write their names at the tops of their notebooks and understood that she was passing herself forward into people who would carry it farther than any single round she'd ever fired. There was a trainee named Settle, quiet, self-contained, the kind of soldier who solved her problems privately before bringing them to anyone, which was exactly why it meant something when she stayed after the others had gone and stood at Whitlock's desk with her hands knotted together. There was a thing before I came here, Settle said. A call that got made above me. I thought it was wrong. I thought it was going to hurt somebody. She looked at her hands. I didn't say anything. I told myself it wasn't my place, and somebody got hurt. Her jaw tightened. I came here thinking if I got good enough at the technical part, it'd somehow fix the part I got wrong. It won't, will it? No, Whitlock said. It won't. Settle nodded like she'd already known and had only needed someone to say it plainly. The thing you didn't say, Whitlock said. Would it have changed it? I don't know. Maybe. Maybe not. I'll never know. That's the weight, Whitlock said. Not the guilt. Guilt has a cause you can point at. This is the other thing. The space where the choice you didn't make just lives, permanently, and you can't collapse it by deciding it one way or the other. The only thing that moves it, not removes it, moves it, is what you do with the next decision. And the one after that. Settle was quiet a long moment. Why are you telling me this instead of the protocol answer? Because the protocol answer doesn't reach the part of you that's asking. Whitlock met her eyes. And because I filed the report, I did the formal thing, the right thing, and it went nowhere and the kid died anyway, and I spent 14 months hiding in a job where I couldn't get anybody killed because I didn't know what to do with a system that ate my warning and gave back nothing. She let that sit. Filing it was right. The outcome was a separate thing. It took me a long time to learn those two facts can both be true. Settle left steadier than she'd come in. That, the narrator thinks, is the whole point of teaching. It was a week after that when the man with no insignia came to find her. Gray jacket, no rank, no name she was given, the particular flat courtesy of a person who exists between the lines of the formal structure. He left a folder on her desk and waited while she read it twice. The way she read everything twice, once for what it said and once for what it meant. The target in the folder was the cold-voiced man from the ridge. The one she'd let live twice. The intelligence was good and the window was narrow and the work was hers if she wanted it. The morning she left, Rayer was standing at the door of the training building. He raised one hand, not a wave, the older gesture, the one that means I see you. I know what this is, go. She raised hers back. The vehicle pulled out through the gate and onto the open road, and she looked forward and let herself feel, fully and without flinching, the whole weight of the thing she was driving toward. She thought about a broken tower in a single round she'd spent on a boy instead of a reckoning. She thought about Jonah Vane. She thought about Pruitt, dead before any of it started. She thought about a trainee named Settle, steadier now, who would teach this forward to someone Whitlock would never meet. The rifle case rode on the seat beside her, and she checked her equipment with her eyes closed by feel, by memory, each piece confirming itself under her hands the way things confirm themselves when you have carried them long enough that they know you back. Iris Whitlock was not a weapon. She was not an asset, or a profile, or a clearance level on a folder. She was a woman who had learned the hardest way there is, that you hold the line in front of you, and you carry the names of the ones you couldn't, and she was going to go hold this one all the way to the end of the road, with her eyes open and the math already running.